everyone. I am excited to come to you today with a review. So my first review video that I am posting, I am working on others, and it is about Champions, issue 1 through 5. So this is written by Ewing, who also wrote Ironheart. She's also an amazing poet and University of Chicago professor. So she's like a very accomplished writer in person, and I've seen her for her poetry live before, and it's amazing. So I was excited to read this series. The artists are Simone DeMeo and Bob Quinn. Their letter is Clayton Cowles, who did Wicked and Divine, and the color artist is Federico Blee. So it's a really great team. I loved the art. Visually, it was just really engaging. But I'm really here to talk about the writing, because the writing was so good. The storytelling was great, which also has to do with the art. It's like a whole experience, right? But I just love what Eve brought to the table. So I had reservations diving into Champions initially, just because sometimes teen-focused comics meant for teens can be a little bit too fluffy for me, and that is not at all what you end up getting within the first 5 issues. There is a lot of layers about autonomy, agency, as well as power dynamics and hierarchies, as well as what it looks like when we stop having dialogue with each other. So I think there's just like a lot to dig into. When we start the story, the Champions have been outlawed because in a moment when they were meant to protect, they actually created more of an incident. The Vision had an explosion, and Kamala Khan was hospitalized. She was in her civilian outfit, so it was not Miss Marvel at the moment, or people did not know it was Miss Marvel. And then the government put into law incredibly quickly the Kamala Khan law, which outlaws the Champions, and it's enforced by Cradle, which is like a government task force. So that's kind of where we're starting the story. Within the first issue, what we see is that there are a lot of differing opinions. You're brought to the school and you see the young adults at the school kind of arguing with each other. Some think that it is the Champions' fault that there was an explosion, that people got hurt, and that this law is good because it's going to actually protect people, because the Champions didn't protect people when they were meant to. It actually caused more harm. And then there are others who are thinking about all of the good that the Champions have done, and the fact that they feel like it's a restriction and it kind of is ageism, that these superheroes are not outlawed because of their age. And there are like some stipulations, like if you have a mentor, like Ironheart has Iron Man as a mentor, so she is able to kind of continue. But if you don't have someone else to mentor you that is an adult superhero, then you are not allowed to act in any way with your superpowers. And so they're considered vigilantes. What I also really enjoyed about this series was that the way that it's consistently shown how many different opinions and voices there are to this kind of movement and issue. So we're not just seeing in the school, there are kind of young adults arguing about this. There ends up being a protest panel where there are people just kind of shouting at each other. And it really mimics what we're seeing just like in our everyday lives, where there is a group of people who are just, both groups feel like they are right, and both feel that the opposing opinions are not only just wrong, but are pushing up against like who you are as a person. So it feels incredibly personal, and there's so much anger behind that. And additionally, we're seeing that there are larger forces at play, but the blame is being placed on the individuals with that protest. Like, if you think that this is wrong, or if you think this is right, then, like, you're the problem. Like, this is the problem, rather than thinking, like, there are larger forces at play that are also causing this, like, the situation. So, for example, one of the kind of extra, like, just people in the protest is being interviewed and is talking about how this law got put into effect, but now that there are more police in schools and there's more people who are marginalized, LGBT community, BIPOC people are being kind of, like, investigated and censored. Like, you can't wear certain things that show support of the champions. You can't say certain things that's in support of the champions. And there are specific groups that are being targeted more than others. And so, though this law is meant to protect, it's actually causing harm to communities of individuals. And so there's, like, this whole other kind of, like, consequence to this law, whereas the people who are just like, oh, it's going to protect us, are not recognizing. There's no recognition on that end. And then there's also no recognition on the other end that there's also, like, people need to be held accountable for certain actions or mistakes that the champions made. And so you're seeing that there's no middle ground to be reached, but you're also seeing how larger forces and this kind of the government trying to make something right is also causing harm. So it isn't just as simple as, like, it's good or bad, right? There's a lot of gray areas, there's complexities to it. And I loved that so much being brought into it, because I think what Ewing does is such a great job of also writing young voices. I felt like it was incredibly authentic, the way that she was writing these teenagers, and the kind of sarcasm and humor and even the seriousness, the way that they were expressing themselves felt very authentic. I wasn't pulled out and was like, wow, some, like, 17-year-old would never say this. It was like, no, this feels genuine and authentic. So I really, really loved that. So that's kind of what's happening in the external world. We're seeing these kind of, like, debates and arguments and protest. And then the champions themselves are having these kind of dividing opinions. Miss Marvel kind of goes on and says, we are going to be outlaws then, because we're not going to stop. And she does this without consulting the rest of the champions. So she herself makes it like a choice on behalf of everyone. And that causes tension within the group. They end up having a meeting and they're like, well, okay, some of them are like, well, what is up with that? Because actually I don't agree with you. And I enjoyed seeing how these kind of, like, dynamics were playing out, because I think it could have been so easy to write a story where all of the superheroes are banding together and feel the same way about this law. They're like, no, we don't want to be, like, censored. We want to help people. We're going to do this no matter what, even if the law is against us. And they're kids. And so I think that's really scary, and there are consequences to that. And Miss Marvel in that moment isn't thinking of those consequences. And so instead of kind of going the easy route, Eve writes a more complex storyline where now you're going to have to deal with the group dynamics of, like, people wanting to leave, people wanting to stay. Who's going to stay? What does that even look like to then be outlaws, and to be on the run, and to be that young on the run? And the rest of the storyline kind of focuses on Miss Marvel, Sam Alexander Nova, Miles Morales Superman, and then Ironheart Riri Williams. What we see is that Riri Williams is really against, like, at first being a part of anything. And Miss Marvel especially feels really offended at that point, because she's like, well, why aren't you helping us? Why are you leaving us? And what she's not understanding. And Ironheart points out is that, like, people know my identity, and I do not have a secret identity or self to rely on. And so one of the aspects that she brings up is, like, what if they charge my mother for negligence and I get taken away from her? And it's just something like that an adult superhero wouldn't have to think about, but she does. And she also has the, like, maturity to think about these consequences, which I think continues to affirm that young adults can have the maturity, can be okay making their own decisions, that they don't always need protection and sheltering. And so much of the story is them trying to figure out, like, how do we move forward? What does it look like when you don't know what's right or wrong? Because this doesn't have, like, a clear, like, this is wrong, this is right situation happening. We also find out that Vision is actually alive, and that she is telling on them out of guilt. She's, like, feeding information to Cradle so that they could find him. So all of these group dynamics are happening. Vision's actually alive, and she's kind of going through her own journey of dealing with the guilt that she caused this explosion that then harmed people, and her feeling like she, like, no one needs her anymore, that she's doing them a service by, basically serving them on a platter to Cradle, because she wants to protect them from themselves in a way, and from continuing to try to be the champions and help out. So then there's some kind of subsequent issues are the champions, like, fleeing every safe house that they find. Viv ends up meeting an older woman who takes her in and accepts her. And then there is also the champions and those who are taken by Cradle. So there is, like, a whole other layer that happens where Cradle is taking the champions, these superheroes, and bringing them to a center where they essentially brainwash them and are treating them horribly. They're trying to convince them that they are walking around and are incredibly dangerous, that most teen superheroes kill their parents, kill their friends, and any of their family, so that they should not want to use their powers, that they are dangerous. And so they sit them down and they have them, like, consistently repeat to themselves that these kids, that they will kill their parents, that they will harm other people if they continue to fight for justice, essentially. And so you can see that there's, like, there's something just not quite right about what Cradle is doing and what the centers are doing, and it's all covert as well. Like, no one actually knows where they're disappearing to. They just get taken, and then they're in what looks like a prison facility, and you see that they're being altered. Like, some of them come out and they have, like, these different personalities, and you're like, okay, this is definitely not okay. And as it progresses, the champions, so, like, Nova, Miss Marvel, and Miles Morales and Ironheart are on the run. We get my favorite people, the X-Men, Cyclops. Cyclops comes to rescue them, as, like, when Cradle is, like, also caught up with them, and we're seeing an exhaustion happen. They're kind of like, we're tired from running. We think we're gonna give up. Like, this might be it. Like, we can't keep doing this forever. And that's when you kind of see, like, they're really young people. Like, most people aren't built to be on the run, but it's understandable that you have these teenagers who are like, what are we supposed to do this for the rest of our life? And so Cyclops comes, Pixie, and they transport them to Ironheart's lab. And they kind of give them a rundown, and they let them know that Viv is alive, that they intercepted her messages to Cradle about where the champions were located. And so they're really shocked, and there's, they begin to realize that maybe it's out of a place of guilt, and they're kind of figuring out their next steps. What, I love is like a good teaching moment. Cyclops brings them to the Marauder ship. So you get Kitty Pryde, Storm, Pyro, and Iceman. And, there's just like a fun action sequence where, the Marauders are fighting for good. And the kids are kind of like, well, how do you know what's right and wrong? And what I love is that there's this line that Storm says, who is suffering, like, we have to look at who is suffering and who is using their power to harm them. So you might not always be right. You might actually, it might seem wrong, but if you're trying to help those are suffering off, the chances of you being wrong are a little bit slimmer. And if, I think Pyro is like, well, if you're wrong, you're wrong. And then you kind of like hold yourself accountable to that. And so he kind of ignites a fire, and they're like, we have to face, we have to kind of hold accountability for ourselves, like the fact that we messed up, that we did cause this kind of explosion that led to, all of these consequences. And they also are like, where did these other champions go? We have to find them. So they go into Cradle, they break everything out, or they break all of them out, and they also show the world that, like, hey, actually, this law isn't meant to protect, it's meant to, like, somewhat protect, but really this law was put into place in order to create, like, fear-mongering and to make citizens turn against the champions so that Cradle could, like, just, like, rob them off the street and then brainwash them, and they were funded by Roxxon. So you see that there are layers to this. Like, all of these people thought, like, okay, this law came into place because it's actually meant to protect people. But really, that wasn't the case. It was a plan set in place to then gain control of the champions and to gain control of these superheroes and to manipulate them. And there is, like, a great panel, well, 2 pages, in the last issue where they start to realize that there was, like, a larger plan in place, that even at the accident, the law was kind of all geared up and ready to go. So it was already created kind of just, like, waiting in the wings for the champions to just make a mistake and for them to then, like, Cradle to come in and Roxxon to come in and take control. And Bombshell, one of the champions, is like, well, it's not that simple. But we did make that mistake, and so we have to hold ourselves accountable. And what some of the other champions kind of get at is that they held them captive, and what they were doing was also wrong, and that they used language like protection really in order to control them. And so the people at the top are making all of these decisions that impact, like, the champions, that are impacting, the everyday people. And there really is no, like, autonomy. Like, you think you're making choices for yourself, but really they're coming from the top down, the top to the bottom, where they're, like, almost like shaping this reality where you thought it was, like, all for your own good and for your own benefit, but there are corrupt systems in place that are actually telling you it's for your safety, but it's not for your safety. There is an agenda behind it. And so that's where these kind of, like, layers of power structures and, government systems and, young adults fighting against those systems, etc., comes into it. And just, like, overall, like, they come back together, the law gets taken, is, like, put on pause, given the fact that Cradle was, like, brainwashing all of these children. And it is just like really cool to read something that I feel like is making a commentary on power structures and dynamics within our own culture through the lens of the champions. Right, this is like a teen comic, 5 issues, and it's incredibly thought-provoking. I really enjoyed it. I think it shows that there's not a simple right or wrong, that there are layers to things, and that there maybe should be digging into issues, into movements, and, you know, questioning more and not assuming anything, holding more curiosity, and holding more dialogue, and not seeing groups and people as monoliths. Because what I think those 5 issues consistently was showing is that there are so many different opinions within these small groups, within these large groups, that it's not ever just, well, everyone thinks the same thing and they're all this kind of, like, I don't know, blanket statement. So yeah, I really, as you can see, I really enjoyed it. I think that if the champions wouldn't necessarily be something you go for or you reach for, I would say this, like, 1 through 5 of Champions Outlawed is something that you should give a go. Even though I've, like, definitely explained all of it, but it was really good. So, you know, 10 out of 10 recommend. I really just want Ewing to write more comics, and I need to go read Ironheart because I have not. And, you know, now after reading that, I feel like I have to. So, you know, if you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe button and the little bell to give you a notification for when I drop more content.